On this episode, we talked about living funerals, pros and cons, what maybe or may not be missing from a living funeral, would they be awkward, and also kind of touched on disenfranchised grief.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Cabal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Cabal, a psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Welcome back to Let's Talk About Death. Today we're going to talk about living funerals. All right, Nick, for you who may or may not know what a living funeral is, it's basically being able to experience your funeral before you die. So you set up basically a mock funeral for you. You get to hear what the eulogy is. You get to hear what the pastor or priest will say. Anybody who's coming up telling stories, what they can say. You get to see the flowers, the casket. I think they actually specifically some have the casket or urn out that they select, and they get to go through the actual process of their own funeral. Now, Nick, I'm going to let you handle this one first. In the psychology field, how do you feel about that kind of, like, how does that?
So I have multiple thoughts. So here's the first thought. I want to be very clear that I think my personal opinion of a regular funeral is for the survivors, right? The survivors of the bereavement. Living funerals are done for the person that's dying. I believe that these living funerals are really good for the person that is dying. They know that inevitably in the next couple months they are going to pass away. They have this thing that is one last, like, hurrah, right? One last goodbye. However, when it comes to the psychology behind death, it worries me because it separates society from having to deal with death, right? We're having this, I don't want to say fake party, death, funeral, but in essence, we are. We are trying to, again, avoid death. And I think it's important for everybody that's thinking about living funerals or thinking about going to them. I really, 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 and I'm going to emphasize really, tell you to make sure that you go to the real funeral too, because that's the important one. That is the closure. That is to say goodbye. Yes, it's nice to say goodbye to that person, and maybe that is a great experience, one last time that you can actually say goodbye to their face. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we as humans have to be okay being around death. That's part of our life cycle, just like being born, getting married, having children. Biologically, our time does come to an end, and that is an important thing that you have to start comprehending, not only for the person that passed away, but for your own sake.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Nick, and I'll actually throw another kind of caveat to that. No matter how you're doing, even if you're doing this living funeral because this person or yourself is going to be not going to be here in the next couple months, however, a year or 2 years. You just found out you had cancer, et cetera, et cetera. No matter if you set up a pre-funeral, the pre-funeral is going to be way different because emotion is way different. Families say it all the time. We know mom had cancer. We knew she was only going to last 2 months. And we thought in our heads, because we have 2 months, we will be prepared for that day. And they always say we were never prepared. So even if you're coming to your demise, and this is a way for you to experience your funeral with your family, your loved ones, you're not going to get the same emotions from them that you would get if you came to the funeral after the death.
I got a challenging topic for you, Ben. If people already struggle with the price of a regular funeral, what makes them want to have this pre-funeral on top of that?
I would say the people who are doing the pre-funerals aren't worried about the monetary. I'll be honest with you. But also, I would say I have not had the honor yet of doing a pre-funeral yet. Ida, Michigan, that's just not something that our families have wanted. I'm sure Dad and I would be willing and be honored to take care of them if they wanted to have one, but we just haven't crossed that bridge yet. Though I would say, yeah, that would be obviously a thought in their head. Obviously, they know funerals are expensive. Everybody kind of knows. That's kind of the stigma, right? Funerals are very expensive. That's kind of how we funeral directors and funeral homes kind of get categorized a lot. So if they're coming in stigmatized. If they come in and they know they want to have an extra thing, they know that there's a cost. We have to keep our doors open, so there's got to be a cost to that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it would be different. It would. I would assume it's less because you're not actually doing the burial. You're not opening the grave. You're not.
Oh, absolutely.
Doing the cremation itself.
Visitation.
Yeah, so you're paying for the visitation and funeral, or just funeral. And the pastor, or however you want to do that.
From my study. And from my reading and the research that is done, one of the big complaints about funeral homes and funeral directors in the funeral industry is that it's pricey. So my question is, if living funerals become something, why do you think monetary value doesn't exist for someone living than someone dying?
That's an interesting.
The psychology behind that's what I'm interested in. Why is that different? If we're going to go celebrate someone knowing that they're going to die versus when they actually die. So then my question becomes, how do we as society view death? When someone dies, are they just not there? Versus we can actually go spend our money on this, living funeral. We can see this person one last time. It's just a party, right?
Well, and there's also the question too, is the person who is dying having the funeral, or is it the family having it for them? Because that's a whole different experience too. Something going back to the monetary thing that I could see happening is they would have the pre-funeral, right? And then when happens, they'll just go direct because the family's already had the funeral. And that's how Dad wanted to go. He wanted to go out being an experience with everybody, including himself or mom, or
so it's another way to escape the funeral,
the actual hurt, the pain of a funeral. Yeah, but Nick, let's be honest. That's kind of the way things are going. There's a lot. The trend right now is a lot more direct. There's a lot more direct burials. There's a lot more direct cremation, and that goes back to our topic point that we're escaping death, right?
Well, and
we're trying to, and the problem is it always kind of comes back up and bites in one way or another.
And here's the thing I do want to say out to people. Let's be very clear, all right? If you don't want to deal with the death, you are going to spend a lot of money down the road talking to someone like me about how getting over that loss.
Or never dealing with it and having even more issues.
Right. Relationship issues, health issues.
No, but you're absolutely right. So we're coming to that same, I think we've jumped over this bridge 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And it comes down to, we really need to focus on the real issue that keeps coming up, and this is why we're doing this podcast, is the education on there is a reason for a funeral. There's a reason
and it's also the
experience.
respect and the time that's allotted and needed for people to grieve.
And like we already stated, some people need that, some people don't. But
right.
It's giving the opportunity for the people who do need that to
disenfranchised grief.
Oh, absolutely.
These people that don't feel like they had the proper way to grieve. Disenfranchised grief, for everybody who doesn't understand what we're talking about here, is the people that feel like they weren't allowed to adequately grieve. So I'm going to give you a story, because this is a great way to explain it. So let's talk about someone who was dating a married person for 30 plus years. The significant other, the spouse, did not know about this person. The person passed away that they were dating. This person came and talked about how I didn't go to the funeral because I didn't feel like I could. But I had this, deep relationship with this person for over 30 years. And that's a disenfranchised grief right there, because society will not allow you to grieve that at that point, because technically you did something wrong. You were dating someone who was married, and how dare you? But let's talk about the feelings behind that loss for that person. This is the stuff that we're going to come across, because we as humans, it's not black and white. Death is not black and white.
No, death is definitely not black and white.
And it brings out a lot of gray. And the thing is, as a therapist, that's the stuff I deal with, right?
Right.
But I do believe that there's a lot of people out here, especially, during the COVID thing, when grandkids can't say goodbye. Grandkids can't come to the funeral. Like, this is what I'm bringing up is a term called disenfranchised grief. And if you feel like you're part of that, look it up. It might help you to know that you're not alone.
But let's get back to the actual topic, Nick, because you really went on it's a Wild West out here with Nick, just shooting up the place.
Bang bang.
But no, going back to the living funerals. But also, Nick, let's take the other side on that. So practice makes perfect, right? That's what they say. That's what everybody says. So what if they still want to have both, right? And what if in the perfect situation everybody still goes to both, right? So it's just another way to deal with death, because you're accepting that it's going to happen, and then accepting that, okay, it has happened. So maybe it isn't. I don't think it's a right or wrong thing, Nick. I want to clarify that. I think there's some good in it, because I do think there is bringing some light to that person. Someday this is going to happen without me.
So something I brought up at the beginning of the show that I want to clarify. I am not saying that I don't believe that a living funeral is a good idea. In fact, I think a living funeral is a really good idea for the person that's passing away, because then they can accept their own death, right?
Right.
The problem is a funeral, to me, as a psychologist, in my experience, is for that person dying.
Correct.
A funeral, a real funeral,
is for everybody
or
else.
Cremation, or
Memorial service,
all that
gathering,
stuff. That is for
everybody
else.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So what I think is beautiful about a living funeral, and I think we as society, we struggle with dealing with people that are dying. Mm-hmm. They're very isolated. They're very alone. Most of them now are stuck in nursing homes or hospitals, right?
Right.
And they barely get any visitors. It's super sad.
Right.
However, this is a good way for that person to have one last party. And you know what I think about a living funeral is that the Irish wake, right? The idea we're going to have one last hurrah party.
Right.
And and the cool part about it is I'm dying, but I'm going to be a part of it.
You know
right.
who might be really good for the living funeral? The eulogist. You know how they usually have that open the air, like tongue in cheek joke, dad was silly or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe it drops flat and then they go, okay, I could revamp it.
It's interesting. You bring up that they go through the whole process of the funeral. And
right.
That's why I worry about that. Because I think some people would say, okay, I went to that. I don't need to go to this.
That's what I'm saying. I can see it being that is the actual funeral or memorial service, or however you want to dress that up.
And I'm going to challenge all you viewers out there that there is going to be people that want that funeral.
Well, I understand that. And what I said earlier is the experience will be completely different at both.
And I think the focus is completely different. Like
Absolutely.
I said, a living funeral is for the person dying.
It's for the living.
The person dying,
yeah.
Right? A funeral, the real funeral, is for everybody else.
Well, I want to state something too. It's not just people who are dying who have living funerals. It's not always people that are on hospice or have been told they have cancer or anything. I've heard just people like to do that. They like to experience that before they actually die. So I just want to clarify, because if somebody's out there and is like, I kind of want to have a living funeral, but I'm not dying.
So I'm going to challenge you as a therapist.
Here we go.
If you are not dying, what is the purpose of having a living funeral for them?
Maybe they just want to experience it. What are people going to say? Who's going to show up?
And then my challenge back to that is, do you think the people that are going to show up at your living funeral are all going to show up at your real funeral?
That could be different. I would say there'll be different. There'll be a difference. Well, let's just be honest. People with jobs and stuff, they can't get out.
I'm just saying, in general, I think you're going to have.
Would there be some people who would specifically want to come to one or the other? Absolutely.
That's what I'm saying.
And there might be people who are offended by it and won't want to come to the living room.
Right. No.
So they would not want to be there, but absolutely they'd love to support and be there for your actual funeral.
And
Which
they
is
might
an
be the people
interesting-
that actually show up at your real funeral too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because that's, to them, that's a respect. That's a in term of endearment, if you will, that I'm going to make it to your.
Do you think you
funeral.
get online condolences for living funerals?
Why not?
That would be an experience.
Ben, if you don't mind, can we just really quickly talk about, like, what's the process of a living funeral? Who's in charge? How is it done? Who do you call? Where do you go?
Ghostbusters. No, all jokes aside, like I said, I have not had the honor of doing a living funeral yet, so I can't specify exactly how they're done, but I can tell you that there are seminars on it. In my opinion, especially with being a Michigan, now this is a Michigan funeral director talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
Could be different state by state. I would assume if you're going to a funeral home to have a living funeral, you'd probably assume you'd want the funeral director to be a part of it, just like a regular funeral. That being said, because you're not actually doing the burial, you're not signing death certificates, you're not actually going, well, maybe you're going to the cemetery, but let's just say for sakes, you're not going to the cemetery. Technically, anybody could do it because there's nothing to do with the disposition. There's nothing to do with the decedent. Therefore, a funeral director, it kind of becomes, and I don't want to say this wrong, but legally null and void. You can
You
be a
almost
funeral
become a
director.
party planner.
Yeah, you're a planner. You're a just like when you're arranging in Michigan, you don't have to be licensed to be an arranger. That's
Right.
Rescue Rangers.
No.
You don't have to be licensed to be an arranger. So in that theory, and it could be anybody. The pastor could take over that. Technically, you could have it just done in the funeral home, and you can have the pastor basically run through it.
Right.
Or you could have the family run through it.
That's a good question. Would a pastor or a priest feel comfortable doing it?
And I don't know. And different faiths could have different. And just like every church has different. Every pastor has a different view on that. And I would assume some dioceses and synods and all that might have different views on that.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'm gonna do some more research with my local pastors and priests on that.
You know what? If you are a religious out there, priest, pastor, minister, whatever you are, leave us your thoughts.
Rabbi.
We're interested. We're interested in what you think about living funerals, and would you be willing to do one?
Hey, and also, if you're just Joe Public, like, let us know, would you want to go to a living funeral, or would you feel like that's awkward, or would you rather go to a living funeral and not go to the actual funeral, and maybe your reasoning behind it? That'd be nice to read about.
And you can do that on.
You could do that on our email at letstalkaboutdeathpod@gmail.com. Now, Nick, you know what time it is. It's Q&A time.
Q&A, everyone loves that Q&A.
Everybody loves those Q&A, and we're going to start with this one. Why is there so much controversy around a living funeral? I have a family member who's in their 90s. They have decided to have a living funeral instead of a funeral after they die. I think it's a pretty cool idea, but some of my other family members don't agree with it. Why is it so controversial?
See, this goes back
Virtual.
to the first thing that I said on the show. Instead of a funeral. So they're going to do a living funeral and not actually have a funeral. Look up the term disenfranchised grief. It will come up because the problem is you are not allowing people to grieve properly for that person.
I think a lot of that comes down to just the specifically people planning not having a visitation or funeral in general. And the theory is, in their minds, they're assuming that it's going to be less to deal with if nobody has to come see me in a casket. I don't want somebody to see me in a casket. If they didn't come to see me before, why would they come to see me after? And what people don't realize is what people don't realize is the people we touch that we don't know that we touched. And I think that's why it's so controversial. Why is it so controversial? Because it is exactly that. Some people need that experience. They need to see and experience death. They need to know what happened. They need to know that is the final. That person is in that casket. They are dead. They are gone. It sounds like such a simple thing, Nick, but people don't realize for some people they need to see it. They need to see it. You need to see it to believe it. It's like old reading Rainbow kind of trying to talk, but that's the experience. Some people don't. Some people don't want anything to do with it. They don't understand. And then other people are like, no, I need a place to go. I need to see it. I need to know that, okay, they are dead. They're gone. And that's what the funeral is.
It's a place to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Let's go on to the next question. I think we answered that pretty well. Ben, the second question was, people who have attended a living funeral, how awkward was it? I just recently heard of a living funeral. I didn't even know it was a thing. I'd imagine it might be a little awkward to attend. What do you guys think about it?
Well, I'll be honest, like I said, I don't have the honor of experiencing a living funeral yet to the date. And maybe if I ever have that, we'll have a redo of this question. I would assume it's becoming more of a thing. So some people are really getting into it. Would it be awkward? I think so. I think for me it would be awkward. I think I guess this is why we're doing the Let's Talk About Death for me and yours experience. I think it would be awkward just for the fact that I have lived a funeral director's life since I was a kid. I don't know any different. I think it would be a good experience, a learning experience. I would assume there's a lot of good things about it, but I think for me, it's like here's a perfect thing. Like I'm a Catholic. I think we've already talked about the Nick. Me and you are both Catholics, born and raised. I've been to a couple different, non-denominational Christian. Because of a funeral director, I see a lot of different faiths and how they deal with mass and service and all that. And every time I go into something that's not Catholic, for me, this is not saying anything against anybody else, it doesn't have the meat and potatoes. I like my stews chunky. I want everything that I want. I know what I want, and I want that. That's why I go to the Catholic. That's why I turn to the Catholic faith. So for me, it would be that. I think it would be, this is really missing the point, which for me is death. It's death and grief. So if there's no death, how can you really truly experience grief?
Now, as a psychologist, I'm going to flip the coin, because one important thing that a lot of people who are dealing with dying deal with on a normal basis is most people don't want to talk to someone who is dying about death. One very positive aspect to a living funeral is that we are bringing the death to the table. It is there. You can't avoid it. This person knows that they're going to die, and that's why they're having this. One final hurrah, right? I think it's a beautiful thing in the way that people can actually discuss that with the living person. I have not been to a living funeral, but the one thing that keeps coming up to me that might be super important for a living funeral is that the person is actually going to be able to talk to people about them dying.
Well, and another positive thing is the convenience of scheduling. Because you're not on a time crunch, which most funerals are at that point, you're dealing with it at need. You do have the opportunity to get more probably people in. They can get their flights in. They can schedule around it. So you are getting
that's a good
more,
that's good
and that's something I thought about just now is the convenience of scheduling if you have that time. And that's maybe one reason, instead of, maybe it's not around Christmas. So they're like, I want to get one more opportunity for my family to come in. And everybody that I want to be there, instead of this is happening in 3 days. Good luck if you can get flights, all that. So,
well, thank you again for those two questions, and make sure that you question us as much as possible.
Question us, questions the questions.
So we're going to switch it up a little bit. We're going to send the Q&A out to you listeners, and we really want you to think about this and then respond. Would you have a living funeral? Why or why not?
And would it be awkward? Or would you think it'd be awkward? You can email us or message us at our email at letstalkaboutdeathpod@gmail.com or message us on Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc.
Thank you so much for listening, because if you ain't talking about death,
You ain't living, Nick.